Hi, Ted. Thank you. We do not currently have a quorum of the Climate Advisory Committee members, so there's no need to call the meeting to order and no need to read the Act 92 statement. We could just go ahead and get started.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
Are there any members of the public? I'm not seeing any names I don't recognize, so I think no. So that item is off too then. All right, awesome. Well, then we're down to item 3, which is welcome. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for your efforts between the last meeting and this. I saw lots of great activity. And tonight we're gonna is the sort of harvest of that activity and refocusing based on that. Our goal tonight really is, tonight is when we begin to whittle down the potential actions. So up until this point, there's been a lot of actions, a lot of effort putting into identifying potential actions that we think we might be interested in, folks writing new ideas for actions. And the intent was to get us to this evening with kind of our minds emptied, if you will, trying to get everything on paper, any idea that we might have rolling around in our head. And if, by the way, new ideas come up, don't fret, just track them, write them down, and we can keep adding stuff in. But tonight we're going to start now all that is divergent. We're generating ideas. Now we're going to start the convergence, the starting to sort of focus in a bit. And so the first aspect that we will be doing for that convergence is to review the actions against the selection criteria that we put together as a team a couple of meetings ago, if you remember. Those criteria that we talked about were support, impact of implementation, and equity of implementation. Those 3 criteria are what we will now review each of the actions against. And the intent there is, as we rate those actions, we will maybe find that some actions are likely to perform very, very well against those 3 criteria. Other actions maybe we think instinctively aren't going to perform very well against those 3 criteria, and some are in the middle. And so what that'll help us do is, first, we might end up deciding that some actions really maybe just aren't quite good enough to go into the cap, and we can take that and put it into a parking lot. So the action idea doesn't need to disappear. We can keep track of that, provide that over with our final documentation. But maybe it just doesn't necessarily end up in the final cap plan if it's a low rater. But the other thing that will help us do is to sort of begin to prioritize actions. Those higher rating actions we maybe want to do earlier rather than later. Now, of course, it's not the only thing related to prioritization. Sometimes it just makes sense to do action 1 before you do action 2. So there is some of that aspect. But we'll be helping to kind of feather that in as we begin to create a finalized action list. But as far as our collective effort here, going through the review of all the actions against the selection criteria is really important, because it's our opportunity to do a gut check on how these things might work. So we're going to do breakout sessions. We'll do 3 rounds of breakout sessions, just as we have all along. The intent is for the sub-teams to collaboratively review those actions against the screening criteria. And I'm actually going to share my screen so that I'll just go right ahead and pull up an action. So for instance here, what you will find on all of them, the action finder has been simplified in a few ways. If no one saved an action or commented on an action, they are now gone. So only the actions that have been saved or written as new are in there. Don't worry, if you want to look again at some of the other ones, we have access to it, so we can definitely do that, help you do that. But we're now starting to whittle in now. And so you'll see that there are just these 3 categories added for each action. And so what we want to do is, as a sub team, just have each action sort of rated. my recommendation is you kind of want to do it intuitively. I mean, there's a little bit of science, but not a lot. I mean, it's kind of a gut check feel, a collaborative gut check feel. And what I suggest is you probably want to move at a relatively good pace. If you do not get to all of the actions, it's not the end of the day. We can do a couple things. One is the sub team. We could organize a follow-up sub team meeting to finish the review. We could have individuals, we could assign, like say each, if there's 15 actions left and there's 5 team members, each team member does 3 actions that would rate. Well, those are really actually, frankly, the 2 best ways of doing it, either setting up another sub team meeting or assigning sub team members to rate them. And you'll want to just decide as a team, if you don't get through all of it, you'll want to decide which approach you would like to do, and then just let me know. If you decide that you're going to have individuals, rate 3 or 4 actions individually, just let me know and I can help assign if you'd like, or you can definitely assign them yourselves. So I'm here to help. If you decide that you want to do a follow-up meeting as a sub team, just let me know and I can help get that set up as well, if that's helpful. But what I would suggest is, as you look at these actions, you kind of want to do a gut check. Like if it's high, if we think it's gonna do really well, that's a 5. If we think it's really gonna not do very well, it's a 1. And of course, 3's in the middle. So what you want to do is you just sort of want to do a quick gut check on that. Like, yeah, I feel like our community is going to be pretty supportive of that. So that's a 5. Or, yeah, I don't know, not so great. I'm going to give it a 2. So you want to just kind of typically what your initial instinct is usually pretty darn good, especially as a group. So you kind of want to see if you can keep a pace going, create a pace and stay there, and you'll find it go pretty well. If you get to one where you're stumped, you just don't know, or 2 of them, but you just can't figure out equity of implementation, just move on. If you get stumped, don't be afraid to move on. We can always come back, right? So that is our intent for the sub-team meetings. A few points of clarification. What you will notice is in some of these, so all of them have these sort of purpley blue cells. Those are the ones you want to steer in. So that's just trying to focus your attention in. That's where you want to put your answers. Put in your 5s and 3s and whatever, and it will automatically average the score while you go. So that's what the color is for, is just to try to help you focus. You will find that some of these action finders, some of the sub-teams, there are some actions in blue. Those actions that are in blue were actions that our team thought, we're going to offer them up again just for consideration for you folks. These are actions that we think might be potentially good for that category. So at the risk of feeling like we're jamming something down your throat, we wanted to offer up some ideas. If you can rate those along with, that would be great. If you don't like it, then just give it a low 1. You'll also see that for some of them, there are a couple of actions which are highlighted in red. And that just is me indicating that we think we'll probably end up shuffling that over to another team because the action itself maybe isn't a direct fit for this sub team, but maybe a great fit for another sub team. So that's what the red's trying to say, is just we'll be reassigning those as we move forward. The other thing to point out is, so as we originally talked about with the action finder, the actions that you've been identifying as potentially interested in, these all come from different communities all over the country. So some of them they're all, of course, written for that community. So you might see, we're going to, communicate about waste management in Flagstaff, or Seattle's going to do X, Y, and Z. So that verbiage is not going to stay. Clearly, we'll be recrafting the final sets of actions to make it appropriate for Hartford. So, but what you'll find is that those actions have not yet been recrafted. We'll do that as we kind of whittle down our list to the ones that we really feel good about. They'll be recrafted to make them Hartford appropriate. So I just want to point that out. Please don't feel nervous or concerned if you're seeing stuff like that, because that won't exist as we move forward. But we want to whittle down our list first, get down to the ones that we really feel good about. The other and the last pointer I'll say is that as you're reviewing this, if you're like, well, actions, that's really good. That's going to be good on support, implementation, that's going to be a good impactor, equity. Geez, the way it's written, I don't think that's going to be a very good equity action. But you know what? If it could just be reworded, or if we could focus it in to improve equity, that would improve it. If you run across an action like that, and that's your feeling, you can either right there add in text right on the action itself. If you want to go ahead and reword it or add a line, feel free to do that. Or if you're not sure what it is, you can just say, rework it. It'll mess up the value. Don't worry about that. But that'll be a flag that we can all figure out together. How might we want to recraft that? So as you review against the criteria, if there's an action that feels good and strong, but you know what, it's just, we don't think it needs to be recrafted to really affect one of these our screening criteria, just note that. Or if you have an edit that would make it better, go right ahead and make the edit. So make the edit or comment. All right. So I think that is all I had for sort of overviewing what our overall goals are for this evening. Are there any questions at all? I see there's chats. I'm not sure what that is. Mr. Eric?
Yeah, I think it would help, Ted, if you either put into the chat the link to the screening criteria definitions. So there was a Word document that at one point we used. So either bring those up on screen or put them into a link so that work sub-teams can review those maybe at the beginning of the exercise, just to review what the definitions were. And also screening criteria number 2, you have impact. My recollection, which isn't always perfect, is that we found ourselves with impact and effectiveness both rating pretty high. And I thought we said something about potentially combining those because they had some similarities. And I don't know if that's I don't know if my recollection is accurate and if that's something the team still wants to do.
Yeah, that is my recollection also. I believe what happened was that the term impact of implementation was reserved, but the definition was kind of blended a bit between those two. But the words impact of implementation versus effectiveness, if you guys want to use another word, we can totally we can do that. Tonight the forms themselves will be saying impact of implementation, but we can think of it in another way if you prefer. I just put into the chat box a link that takes you to the definition page for each of these, and I can how about if I share my screen really briefly for that also, and we can look at that. Okay. So, all right. So the 3 criteria were support. How likely is it to be adopted by the municipality or community-wide? Is it politically feasible? Is there community support? Is it consistent with the municipal or community priorities and readiness to implement? Impact of implementation. How likely is it to achieve the goal? Will it impact a large portion of the targeted emissions sector or population? What are the potential impacts to the 7th generation, the well-being of people worldwide, and the health of the planet? How likely is it to address the goal? Equity of implementation. Will it positively support advancing equity within the community? Address an existing inequity in the community, such as disproportionate poor air quality, access to transit, food risk, etc.? Does it address the needs of the vulnerable and historically marginalized populations? Does it reduce vulnerability for all populations? Is it fair? Does it avoid having a negative impact on people outside our community? So those were the three criteria considerations, as I recalled it.
Ed,
Yes, sir.
could you go through a couple of examples of equity of implementation? For instance, let's assume that the action that we were talking about was building a bus stop in a given place because more people would take the bus and therefore less people would be driving cars and we'd be achieving a number of objectives. But if the bus station is not in a chronically underserved population location, then you could say it's not equitable. How do you make these value judgments?
So I think that's a really good example. Another would be solar, for instance. Maybe there's a campaign around building, getting solar advanced in the community. And solar, of course, has cost parameters to it. And unless we do something specific to try to buy down the cost of solar or make it affordable or find affordable strategies for solar for low income communities, like community solar, for instance, which can be a different kind of metric. So in an example like the bus stop or the solar, for instance, an action as it's written, it may not actively work against equity. Like there's nothing in it where we can perceive that it's going to actively make inequities happen, right? But it maybe isn't doing anything to necessarily improve inequities. So if that's the case, it might be like a 3. It's like literally in the middle. It's doing neither.
Okay.
Is one way to think about it,
Yeah.
And if one is like actively, like if we do this, it could actually make inequities worse or create a new inequity. It has a potential to create a new inequity that we don't currently experience. And that's a 1. I mean, that's a 1. It's definitely the rock bottom. And in fact, maybe we want to flag it or whatever. And in that instance, we probably want to reword it, or if it's really truly could be devastating, then we need to rethink it. But I think what you'll tend to find more often than not is that an action maybe just is equity deaf. I mean, that's kind of how I think of it. It isn't thinking about equity per se. It's just thinking about, we want people on the bus. And so that's where I think there's a great opportunity to say, well, okay, so we want to add bus stops. And if we don't say anything further than that, it's kind of equity deaf. It isn't necessarily helping or hindering. It just is, we're talking about bus stops. So an easy way to tweak that, or a way to tweak that, would be to say, and we're going to focus studying bus routes and bus stops to advance mobility for underrepresented or marginalized populations, or something of that nature, right? And so now you've taken an equity deaf action, and you're starting to indicate how we can move it into an equity positive action. Does that make sense?
Well, except that those are 2 different actions, aren't they?
In terms of, well, I'm not sure. Can you expand on that? What you
Yeah.
mean by that?
Okay, so one action is to expand bus stops. And the second action is to do a study of what might be a better bus system.
That is true. We may decide that they need to be two actions, but in terms of the bus stop, you could say, we're going to add bus stops. You can expand it out and say, we're going to add bus stops where they advance equity of mobility, right? And then that's still one action, but you've modified it. You've provided a vector to it of intending to advance equity.
Okay. I'll drop it from here.
I mean, no, I mean, I think it's an awesome question. So if it feels wrong, we can definitely, we have a couple minutes we can spend to try to.
Yeah, well, I think the 3 solution may be the best where there are cross currents.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. And that'll also flag as we see, if we see an action that's not performing quite as well against one of the criteria, we can think together how might it be improved.
Yeah.
Especially if it performs really well in others. I mean, if an action's a great action, but it's not really hitting on all cylinders, that's a great action for us to explore modifying. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments at all? Does this feel straightforward in terms of what we're looking to do? And
Ted, I appreciate that you put these screening criteria up on the screen here and give us the link. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I was looking to see if I had a link to the original document that we put our X's in and voted on, and that had the original definition for effectiveness. And I can't find that. I don't know. It doesn't feel like the language there for screening criteria number 2 is really a merger between implementation and effectiveness. I could well be wrong though. Maybe is that something that you could dig up sometime during the course of tonight?
yeah, actually I can go, I can definitely do that. And found it. All right, and the awkwardness of screen sharing, let me know. Go back to that. Okay. So effectiveness, how likely is it to address the goal? Is this addressing a high priority vulnerability or a major source of emissions? And then this I added in the moment, combined with impacted implementation.
Yeah, it's that major source of emissions language that I had stuck in my head and wasn't seeing that.
Yeah, so this says, so impact of implementation, how likely is it to achieve the goal? Will it impact a large portion of the targeted emissions sector or population? What are the potential impacts to the 7th generation, the well-being of people worldwide, et cetera? So these first 2 lines here are actually lifted from effectiveness.
Okay, good. Thank you for clarifying that.
You bet. It's a good thing to make sure we're clear on. Okay. Anything else? Any other questions or comments? Oops, I'm sorry. I just see there are people waiting to get in. Sorry, folks. Zoom is horrid. It's a horrid tool. I really look forward to doing stuff in person again. Actually, it's wonderful. There's great advanced opportunities to it, but so I'm sorry for those of you that are just coming in. I didn't mean to leave you waiting in a waiting room for a while. I just didn't see you. So I've got a couple of folks to add, but if we're all clear on what we're doing, I'm going to go ahead and open up the rooms. Let me double check the. Alrighty. I'm going to open up the rooms. You should all go whisking off. There are a couple of you that are not yet assigned, but I will be assigning you.